Welcome to the third week of Dhamma Roundtable. For this week, we will be discussing a quote by Luang Por Thun in which he discusses suffering. The important point of the quote of this week is that Luang Por Thun stresses that suffering occurs in our own minds, and it is our minds that cling to the suffering. Now, this is a very important quote. The point of it is, suffering occurs in our own minds. How do we know this? A lot of times we think that suffering is joined, is shared, or suffering is just everywhere. However, if we take a second out to think and to realize that suffering actually occurs individually in each person's mind, the suffering and the level of suffering is not shared through each person, through other animals. The suffering and the level of suffering is unique to each mind. Why is that? It's because each mind clings to the suffering differently. Each mind chooses its own path of how to deal and cling with the suffering. And because of this, this is why suffering occurs in our own minds, and it is our minds that cling to the suffering. Now we will share some examples of how we know for sure that suffering occurs in our minds and is not necessarily shared or a joint suffering between us and other people.
So I have an example from today. I dropped my mom off and I saw there wasn't any parking, so I thought, why not? I'm gonna go see if that boba place is open. You know, it's supposed to open at 11 and it's 11 now. So I drove over there and I couldn't find parking, but I kept driving by the same spot and I was like, you know, it's 11, it's 11:05, it's 11:06, and they still haven't opened yet. All the lights are off and I see people standing in front waiting and they haven't opened yet. And immediately my mind went back to like the week before and then the week before that, where I also tried to get boba at 11 when they're supposed to open. That's the time it says they open. And I made a conclusion right away. I said 3 times already that it's been past 11, they're supposed to open at 11, and they're still not open yet. That means that these people have lazy workers. Automatically, I thought, or else their workers are coming late, or they don't have like good time management, or this and that and that. It's who knows what happened. Maybe their time, you know, they maybe really open at 11:30 or whatever. But the part that is clear is that the suffering is with me. And that the part that made me suffer was my thinking about it, was my conclusion that I drew from the fact that they're not open at 11. That means that, you know, X, Y, Z. And what I used for a basis in my conclusion is my own experience as a business owner. You know, like if one of my workers who's supposed to open up the restaurant doesn't open on time, why? Is it because they're spending time in the bathroom, they missed the bus, they whatever? I put all of those, my own personal experience, and applied it to something that who knows if it even relates at all. You know, so it's very clear to see that the suffering doesn't exist on the outside, it definitely exists on the inside with us. We create it, we reinforce it, and we maintain it. We make sure that it persists.
Okay, so my example is when I eat out with somebody else at a restaurant, you know how it is, like, you know, the other person would be pretty busy with their smartphone, and I would just sit there doing nothing, and I usually feel pretty embarrassed and kind of upset because I don't know, I just feel left out, and apparently I'm the only one suffering because the other person usually looks that they're okay with it.
So the primary bike that I use to commute to work is in a shop for 2 weeks. Therefore I had to use another bike, and I did not get the joy when I ride the bike as I used to when I use my primary one. I guess it's just me who didn't have the joy feeling, because you know, other people still buying the bike and they seem to enjoy about it.
I used to work in a company of about 15 people, all in one room, and then one day when I work, I realized that, well, how come the internet is like so slow? And to make sure that I'm not alone here, I asked around, you know, my coworkers, hey, is the internet slow for you? And then out of, you know, probably like 5 people that I asked, they don't say, you know, they don't feel that the internet is slow at all. So I was frustrated by myself, and you know, for me the internet is so slow, and I am the one that suffered. Other people find it fine. So, you know, that's, I think, for me is the example of my own mind creating my own suffering.
So in the examples that we have heard, such as in Teresia's, where she talks about how when she's sitting at a dinner table with someone talking on their phone or playing with their phone, it makes her feel uncomfortable or upset. This shows that, at least for her, the suffering has occurred in her. She's feeling upset. She doesn't like it. But obviously the person who is talking on the phone or playing with their phone doesn't mind it. Otherwise, why would they be doing it? There might also be other people at the table who don't seem to mind it that someone's on their phone or using their smartphone. This is a proof that shows us that it is only us that is experiencing the suffering in this case, because the suffering occurs in our own mind. So in Tiki's example, we see that he's unhappy because he has to ride his backup bike. He doesn't get to ride his primary bike because it's in the shop. Well, how do we know that this is suffering only for him when he's the only one in this story? Well, we can extrapolate from the idea that for his backup bike, it is not only him that has purchased this bike. Most likely this bike is being purchased everywhere and is being used by people and being sold by the different companies. So it is fair to say that other people enjoy this bike. Even though we don't enjoy the bike, it doesn't mean that no one else does. So in this case, this is also another good example of how it is our minds that are suffering. Not all bike owners, not all people who own this secondary bike, or even they wouldn't even call it a secondary bike. For them, it is just a bike. But for us, it's a bike that we are unhappy with. This shows that the suffering occurs in our minds. And in Erwin's example, this is also another good example. One that we might all have experienced at some point ourselves. When we feel the internet is slow, or we feel the internet is not being what we want it to be, we feel upset, we feel unhappy. But in this case, Erwin was able to ask his coworkers and find out how other people felt about the internet being down. Other people didn't seem to mind that it was slower. Other people didn't seem to mind either. So this showed that to Erwin, the suffering occurred in his own mind. It was not a shared suffering, it was a personal suffering. So in each of the cases before us, it is clear that it is our own minds that experience the suffering. Now comes the next part of the quote in which we talk about how it is our own minds that cling to it. When a mind clings to suffering, what does that mean? The word clinging might be a little too fancy for most people to understand. A better word would be repeat. In our minds, whenever we experience suffering, we choose to repeat something. Reasons, explanations, things that support us in why we should be angry. And the more we back up our thoughts, the more we back up our anger, the more angry we become. In future occurrences, the more we back it up, the more angry we get in the future. And the next time we see it, the worse it gets. Such as if you have a problem with your parents, such as let's say you dislike your father. Well, when he does something bad, you say, ha, see, he's a bad guy, he's not a good guy. The next time he does it, same thing, what a bad guy, what a bad dad. You keep collecting evidence and reminding yourself of the anger that you want to have, the anger that you keep experiencing. This is what it means to cling or to repeat constantly the anger that you want to have. Even though you might think you don't want to have it, you keep backing yourself up with the excuses and the explanations that support your reason for being angry. Now let's hear the explanations from our lay people as to why they are angry. What thoughts are in their heads as they get angry?
So my mind was clinging to the perception that I think I look stupid because the other person doesn't find me interesting and they would prefer to be, more engaged with their smartphone instead of having a conversation with me.
So the reason I'm not so happy about riding the backup bike is, in my mind, I thought that if I'm gonna commute using a bike to work, I'm supposed to commute with style. In style to me equal to a road bike, look really cool, really low profile, So I think therefore that is equal to, for me, looking good in my head.
So why am I so suffering when the internet is so slow? Because in the back of my mind, I keep reminding myself that I am the web engineer here, so in the company where it is an internet marketing. So engineers has to have like the priority. So like faster internet and no downtime, no whatever. And so from that, I would start thinking like, what makes the business in that company grow? Is it just because of the engineers, or is it because of something else? So from there, I can try to break myself, or like postpone myself not to suffer more, because it's actually, the fact is, the web engineer is not like the only thing important in company. Web engineer, without the accountant, without the business people, they cannot go anywhere. So who am I to say that I'm a web engineer, I'm like the most top priority in the company? It's totally not true, because the business people is also important, the accounting people is also important, and all those people, even the front desk, are also important. Without them, the business may not be run as smooth as how it was.
So as we can see in Teresia's case, she sees that she thinks that by not being paid attention to, she's not important, that other people will see her as that she looks stupid. Or in Tiki's case with the bikes, we see that he thinks that other people will think that he doesn't look cool, or that it's not a cool bike or a cool riding that he's doing. Or in Erwin's case, we see that he thinks that people won't see that he's important, or that he doesn't have value. These are the thoughts that keep going through our heads when we're angry, and we keep repeating them until we stay angry, and we stay angry, and we keep staying angry. And that's why we're unable to conquer our anger. Now, the way to conquer our anger is through this. We must pay attention to these thoughts, to these reasons, to the repeated reasons and the repeated thoughts that we keep seeing in our minds. We must evaluate the validity of these thoughts. We must pay attention to the truth behind these thoughts. We must compare these thoughts to impermanence, such as, in Teresia's case, is it true that for all people, if someone is not talking on the phone and someone is, the person not talking on the phone looks bad to you? No, it is not guaranteed. It is not permanent. Why? Sometimes we see people on the phone, we think they look bad. Sometimes we see people not on the phone and we think they look bad. Sometimes we don't mind. Sometimes we're not even paying attention. This shows us that it's impermanent whether or not someone looks bad if they're not on a phone, or someone looks bad if they're not being paid attention to. You can't tell what other people think, therefore we should not make these assumptions or assume in this manner. Or in Tiki's case, how do we even know that other people know what we look like? How do we even know what other people are thinking of us? In our case, when we see someone riding a bike, do we know if that's their primary bike or their secondary bike? Do we know whether or not this is the coolest they can look, or this is just a backup cool? Do we know? It's impermanent. Or in Erwin's case, that someone doesn't care about us if they don't make the internet fast because that's part of our job. Is it guaranteed that that's the reason why the internet's not fast? Because people don't care? Could there be other reasons? Is it this also impermanent? By seeing the impermanence in each of these cases, we make it so that we are able to control our anger and see that the source of our anger is actually impermanent. So in conclusion, all of the suffering that we incur, all of the suffering that we experience it. It occurs in our minds. It occurs within us. In addition, it is us that clings to it. We cling by repeating these thoughts, by repeating and reminding ourselves of why we should be angry. In order to get rid of the repeating, we must do the opposite and teach our minds in regards to these examples, these excuses, these reasons, whether or not they actually are true and good reasons backed by logic and fact. This is the practice that Longpa Tun meant by this quote.